The galaxy did not notice the first collapse. That was the most terrifying part. A trade relay failed along the Persei spur, a minor inconvenience dismissed as routine degradation. Autonomous repair swarms were dispatched. None returned. Sensor buoys recorded nothing unusual. No explosion, no radiation spike, no enemy signature. Just absence. A section of mapped space where data stopped agreeing with itself. Then a second relay vanished. Then a border star dimmed by exactly 3% and never recovered. By the time the High Convergence Council convened, the problem had spread across 12 systems, each failure subtle enough to be ignored in isolation, but together forming a pattern that no predictive model could explain. Supply chains misaligned. Navigation beacons disagreed on distances. Ships arrived seconds before they departed. Physics still functioned, but poorly, like a language spoken by something that had only learned it from memory. The elder species felt it first. They had survived stellar extinctions and vacuum plagues. They had seen galaxies collide and empires rot from within. They trusted numbers, probabilities, and long precedent. None of those tools offered comfort now. The galaxy was not under attack. It was being adjusted. Confidence filled the council chambers anyway. It always did. The dominant civilizations had cataloged every known threat. Expansionist swarms, machine intellects, star-devouring parasites. Even the long-dead species that once reshaped reality itself were archived, studied, neutralized by time. This anomaly did not match any of them. Scouts were sent deeper into the affected regions. Heavily shielded. Redundant. Their mission parameters were simple: observe, record, withdraw. No ship returned intact. Some vanished entirely. Others reappeared light years away, their internal clocks desynchronized by decades, crews dead without trauma, systems reporting impossible maintenance logs dated centuries in the past. Fear crept in slowly, resisted by arrogance. The galaxy had faced worse. Theories multiplied. A new natural phenomenon. A weaponized singularity. A rogue intelligence evolving beyond known constraints. Emergency models simulated wars, evacuations, sacrifices measured in billions of lives. The calculations were grim, but familiar. What unsettled them was the silence. No demands, no declarations, no evidence of intent. Just systems quietly falling out of alignment, as if something ancient and vast was passing through, uninterested in resistance. At the edge of the anomaly, a neutral archive world activated its deepest memory vaults. Not to find solutions, but to reassure itself. History had answers. It always did. The archivists began with extinct civilizations. Thousands of names scrolled past, species that burned bright and vanished, victims of entropy, war, or irrelevance. Among them were the expected entries, aggressive conquerors who overreached, isolationists who stagnated, artificial minds that optimized themselves into oblivion. One entry was barely a footnote. Designation, humanity origin, solar system status, presumed extinct cause, early interstellar collapse. The archivists lingered only briefly. Humans were unimportant. They had reached the stars late, fractured by internal conflict. Their biology was inefficient, their lifespans short, their societies volatile. Early encounters described them as emotionally driven, strategically short-sighted, incapable of sustaining unified expansion. Their colonies failed. Their signals faded. Their home system went dark. The galaxy moved on. So the entry remained untouched for centuries, referenced only in academic curiosities about failed ascension species. The current crisis did not justify reopening it. And yet, as the anomaly expanded, something strange occurred inside the archive's deepest layer. A sealed subsystem, one that had not been accessed since the first human collapse, activated without command. It bypassed modern encryption as if it had been designed before those protocols existed. The archivists noticed only because the system requested additional processing mass. What emerged was not a warning. It was a correlation. The archive overlaid ancient human exploration routes with the present anomaly's expansion vectors. The match was imperfect but unmistakable. Not identical paths, but familiar logic. The way the disruption curved around gravity wells. The way it avoided certain stellar compositions. The way it favored regions humans had once marked as strategically stable. The archivists flagged the result as coincidence. They had to. Admitting otherwise would imply that a species erased before most modern empires were born had left behind something capable of influencing the galaxy now. Elsewhere, a war fleet attempted to force passage through the affected space. Thousands of vessels advanced with shields at maximum output, weapons primed to annihilate whatever dared resist. They encountered nothing. No enemy fire. No barrier. Just a sensation reported simultaneously across every ship. Pressure. Not physical. Not mental. Something closer to proximity. Like passing near a massive object hidden in darkness. Then the fleet disappeared from every sensor net in the galaxy. No explosion. No debris. No energy release. Their last telemetry packet contained only corrupted navigation data and a single repeating error flag. Reference frame not found. The galaxy could no longer pretend. Emergency doctrines escalated. Border systems evacuated. Experimental weapons were armed despite treaties older than most stars. Still, no one knew where to strike. Because there was nothing to fight. Only effects. Only consequences. At the periphery of the anomaly, a deep space observation array, one so old its builders had forgotten parts of its original purpose, registered a faint signal. Not a broadcast. Not a transmission meant to be heard. A residue. Encoded in gravitational variance. Buried beneath cosmic background noise, detectable only because the array's calibration routines were equally ancient. The pattern did not match any living species. It was inefficient, redundant, layered with fail-safes that assumed catastrophic loss as a default condition. The analysts struggled to classify it, until an automated subroutine triggered a cross-reference with extinct archives. The system hesitated. Then it returned a result it was never meant to access. The pattern matched a human military construction signature. Not modern. Not colonial. Pre-collapse. A designation tag surfaced alongside it, stripped of context but horrifying in implication. Hurricane class, strategic last resort asset. The council chambers fell silent as the data propagated. Humans were gone. Their worlds were ash. Their species erased from relevance. And yet, somewhere in the dark between stars, something built by them was moving. Not broadcasting, not announcing itself, just executing a plan that had been waiting long enough for the galaxy to forget who wrote it. The final report ended with a line no one could explain. Activation condition met, galactic failure cascade. Humanity should not exist. But the galaxy had just triggered their contingency. The galaxy answered uncertainty the only way it knew how. With certainty. Emergency conclaves formed across hundreds of star systems, each echoing the same conclusions in different languages and logic frameworks. The anomaly was unprecedented, yes, but not inexplicable. History proved that every crisis eventually resolved into something smaller, weaker, or more familiar than it first appeared. The dominant civilizations spoke first. They reviewed the data with practiced calm and reminded the lesser powers of what mattered most: precedent. Every existential threat the galaxy had ever faced announced itself loudly. Expansionists broadcast ideology. Machines optimized openly. Predators hunted visibly. Silence, they argued, was not strength. Silence was absence. And absence meant extinction. The archived designation resurfaced again and again during these debates. Humanity, a species that failed before it ever stabilized its interstellar footprint. Analysts projected simulations of early human conflicts, fragmented governments, internal wars, ideological schisms. A civilization that could not even agree with itself had no business surviving among the stars. Their technology had been crude. Chemical propulsion lingering far too long into their space age. Over-reliance on vulnerable communication infrastructure. Redundant systems born not of foresight, but paranoia. That paranoia, the analysts insisted, was the key flaw. Humans prepared for threats they imagined, not threats that mattered. They were too emotional, too impulsive, too divided by culture, belief, and history. One council member summarized it cleanly. Humans were optimized for drama, not endurance. The anomaly, therefore, must be something else. Perhaps an ancient relic weapon misfiring after millennia. Perhaps a natural space-time instability triggered by reckless modern experimentation. Perhaps even a rogue autonomous system left behind by a far more capable species. Anything was more plausible than the return of humanity. Confidence spread. The councils reassured their populations. Trade would resume. Borders would stabilize. The galaxy had survived worse. Military planners adjusted projections downward, reclassifying the anomaly from existential threat to emergent hazard. Containment strategies replaced evacuation models. That was when the inconsistencies grew harder to ignore. A research collective attempted to map the anomaly's expansion rate using probabilistic forecasting. Their results refused to stabilize. The expansion was not accelerating or decelerating. It was adapting. Routes that would cause maximum disruption to hostile powers were affected first. Neutral systems were bypassed with unnerving precision. This was not random. Still, the explanation held. A weapon, perhaps. Weapons followed logic. Another civilization, renowned for its historical archives, cross-checked the anomaly's behavior against every known strategic doctrine in recorded history. Thousands of matches appeared. None fit completely. The closest alignment, dismissed initially as statistical noise, originated from human-era military theory. The archivists flagged it and moved on. Humans had theorized endlessly. Most of it had never been tested. More troubling was the discovery of what the anomaly did not do. It did not target population centers. It did not annihilate biospheres. It did not pursue fleeing ships. It removed infrastructure, logistics hubs, command relays, fleet concentrations mid-transit, everything required to sustain war. The galaxy's militaries found themselves intact, but increasingly blind, isolated, and starved of coordination. Commanders cursed outdated sensors and blamed saboteurs. Yet no sabotage could explain the uniformity of failure across rival empires that shared nothing in common. Except one thing. They were all preparing for war. The first serious unease emerged among the elder strategists. Those who remembered conflicts measured not in years, but in epochs. They had seen civilizations dismantled not by force, but by exhaustion. The pattern felt familiar. Not to any species currently alive. To something older. A classified task force was assembled to reassess extinct species deemed irrelevant. The goal was simple: eliminate blind spots. Humanity's file was reopened reluctantly, more as an academic exercise than a strategic necessity. The deeper layers of the archive told a different story. Humanity's final centuries were not chaotic collapse. They were quiet. Colonies did not fall in waves. They vanished in sequence. Communications ceased not abruptly, but selectively. Military records indicated large-scale asset redeployment away from core systems shortly before total signal loss. There was evidence of coordination, evidence of restraint. One analyst noted something deeply unsettling. Humanity's last recorded military expenditure spike occurred after they were already losing. Not during expansion, not during victory, during retreat. They were building something. No records survived describing what. The councils dismissed the finding as incomplete data bias. Humans had always overbuilt for imagined threats. It explained nothing. Then a border defense network in a non-aligned sector went offline. Not destroyed. Simply unavailable. When technicians restored partial access, they found new code layered beneath their own, running silently, performing diagnostics on systems it did not belong to. The code did not interfere. It did not replicate. It observed. Its architecture was inefficient by modern standards. Excessively cautious. Every function wrapped in fail-safes that assumed the system might already be compromised. It was unmistakably human. Panic did not erupt. Not yet. Instead, denial hardened. The dominant civilizations doubled down on their conclusions. Humanity had been weak. Whatever remained was a ghost. Automated remnants acting without intelligence or intent. Dangerous, perhaps, but manageable. Orders were given to capture the anomaly's edge. Specialized fleets were dispatched with instructions not to destroy, but to seize whatever mechanism lay at its core. They never reached it. The fleets slowed as they approached, not due to resistance, but correction. Their own navigation systems began rerouting them away from optimal paths. Thrusters compensated for forces that should not exist. Time synchronization failed between ships separated by mere kilometers. The commanders reported a growing sensation of being guided, as if the safest path forward was always just out of reach, as if someone had already calculated where they would go and quietly adjusted the terrain. The fleets withdrew, shaken but intact. For the first time, A council session ended without a formal declaration. No reassurance followed. No confident projections. Across the galaxy, a subtle shift occurred. Military drills increased. Archives were scoured not for weapons, but for context. The younger species sensed it immediately. The elders recognized it with dread. This was not the opening move of an invasion. It was the preparatory phase of something patient. Something that had waited long enough to let the galaxy convince itself that humanity did not matter. And now, in the quiet between collapsing systems, doubt began to spread. Not fear yet, but the unsettling realization that the assumptions holding the galaxy together might be catastrophically wrong. The first undeniable intervention did not arrive with fire. It arrived with absence. A core logistics nexus in the Viral Compact, one of the most strategically important transit hubs in known space, was scheduled to fall within hours. The ongoing galactic crisis had left it isolated, its defensive fleets stranded without coordination, its supply lines fractured. Enemy forces were already converging, confident that the system's collapse would fracture the compact permanently. Every projection agreed on the outcome. The hub would fall. The compact would break. The war would accelerate. Observers across the galaxy watched the build-up, not out of hope, but inevitability. This was how galactic conflicts unfolded when pressure reached critical mass. One collapse triggered another. The anomaly had simply accelerated what was already coming. Then the timers stopped agreeing. Fleet commanders reported arrival windows that no longer matched real space distances. Reinforcement vessels appeared early, or not at all. Enemy armadas stalled at the edge of the system, their formation coherence degrading without visible cause. No shots were fired. Instead, the transit lanes feeding the hub began to fail. Not catastrophically, gracefully. Jump corridors collapsed into inert space-time with no residual energy. Backup routes attempted to compensate and were quietly rerouted into harmless loops that returned ships to their point of origin hours later. It was as if the galaxy itself had decided that no one would reach the system today. The enemy commanders accused the compact of deploying an illegal spatial interdiction weapon. The compact denied it, genuinely confused. Their own fleets were equally affected. No one was in control. Then the most important signal arrived. A long-range sensor platform, positioned well outside the anomaly's influence, detected a mass shadow entering the system's periphery. It did not arrive through conventional transit. It did not register as a ship. It was simply there. The shadow displaced stars behind it. Gravitational readings spiked, then stabilized at values that made no sense for any known structure. The object did not move fast. It did not maneuver. It oriented, not toward the compact, not toward the enemy, toward the transit network itself. Over the next 20 minutes, every active jump point within the system shut down in sequence. Not destroyed, disabled. Each collapse was clean, precise, leaving behind space-time too stable to be forced open again by emergency methods. The war fleets were stranded and safe. The attacking armada could not advance. The defenders could not pursue. The system was isolated from the war not by conquest, but by removal from relevance. The object did not remain. As soon as the last corridor collapsed, the mass shadow faded. Sensors strained to reacquire it and found nothing. No wake, no radiation, no trace that anything had ever been there at all. The Viral Compact survived. So did its enemy. Both emerged from the event shaken, their war plans rendered obsolete in an instant. Across the galaxy, analysts replayed the data obsessively. The intervention had violated every principle of known warfare. No territory was claimed. No enemy eliminated. No message sent. But the effect was undeniable. A major escalation point had been neutralized without a single casualty. That alone would have been enough to unnerve the councils. What followed shattered them. A second event occurred less than an hour later, light years away. An ancient stellar forge, a megastructure older than most current civilizations, had long been the backbone of a regional alliance's military production. It was a symbol of permanence, protected by layers of defense and political treaties. Its loss would cripple dozens of systems. Without warning, the forge's internal power lattice destabilized. Engineers scrambled, assuming sabotage or catastrophic failure. Emergency shutdown protocols engaged automatically. But before the lattice could collapse, something intervened. Power was rerouted. not through the Forge's systems. Around them, energy that should have torn the structure apart flowed into an external containment field that had not existed moments earlier. The field's architecture was alien, yet disturbingly familiar to those who had studied extinct human designs. The Forge survived. Barely. Its output, however, was reduced to zero. The megastructure was intact, but inert. A monument without function. Military production across an entire region halted overnight. The Alliance screamed sabotage. Their enemies screamed foul play. The galaxy screamed confusion. Two events. Opposite outcomes. Same signature. In one system, a war was prevented. In another, a military backbone was quietly disarmed. No pattern made sense, until someone asked the wrong question. Not who was being attacked, but why those targets mattered. When analysts overlaid the affected systems with predictive war escalation models, a chilling alignment emerged. Every intervention corresponded to a future scenario where total war would become unavoidable. The anomaly was not reacting to conflict. It was preempting it. That realization triggered something far worse than fear. It triggered panic. If this force could decide which wars were allowed to continue and which were not, then sovereignty itself was an illusion. Empires began to question whether their survival depended not on strength, but on compliance with an unknown standard. Emergency sessions escalated into accusations. Accusations turned into mobilizations. Mobilizations collided with failing infrastructure. And through it all, the anomaly continued to expand, slowly, deliberately, cutting off flashpoints, disabling arsenals, isolating fleets before they could clash. Humanity's name resurfaced everywhere now, not as a theory, as a whisper. A suppressed research node finally decrypted a fragment recovered from the first mass shadow event. It was not a transmission meant for others. It was an internal status marker, the kind used only for machine verification. The language was human. The timestamp was current. The designation was worse. Hurricane-class asset, Phase 1 containment complete. No one knew how many phases existed. No one knew what Phase 2 meant. The councils issued galaxy-wide emergency escalation orders. Experimental weapons were armed. Ancient defense pacts reactivated. Borders locked down. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy prepared not for invasion, but for judgment. The galaxy searched for a weapon. Instead, it found graves. As emergency escalations rippled outward, intelligence agencies and archivist orders turned inward, away from the present crisis and toward the past. If humanity was involved, then the answer would not be found in modern space. It would be buried in records older than most living species. What emerged was not a story of defeat. It was a story of deliberate ruin. The first recovered fragment came from a derelict human colony far beyond the Sol system, drifting in a cold stellar halo no modern power had bothered to chart. The world had no atmosphere left. No cities. Just scars burned into its crust in precise geometric patterns. Orbital scans showed something unsettling. The destruction was internal. The planet had not been bombarded. It had been dismantled. Core materials extracted. Mantle destabilized. Oceans boiled away not by impact, but by controlled energy release. Whoever destroyed the world had taken their time, and everything useful with them. Archaeologists expected panic records, evacuation logs, evidence of collapse. They found none. Instead, they found planning. Buried beneath kilometers of vitrified rock were sealed archives, preserved beyond any reasonable expectation of survival. They did not contain pleas or warnings. They contained ledgers, population transfers, asset migrations, system abandonment schedules stretching across centuries. Humanity had not lost worlds in war. They had spent them. Other sites followed. A former agricultural hub reduced to dust after soil exhaustion made it strategically vulnerable. A manufacturing moon stripped down to its orbital frame and then deliberately deorbited into its gas giant. Entire star systems darkened not by enemy action, but by coordinated shutdowns that starved their own colonies of light. To the galaxy, it looked like madness. To those who studied it closely, it looked like tree-off. Humans had reached a conclusion early in their interstellar history, one no other species had ever willingly faced. They could not win an open galactic war, not against ancient powers, not against entities that treated time as a resource. not against a galaxy that rewarded expansion over caution. So they chose something else. They chose to endure by disappearing. Recovered human strategic doctrine painted a bleak picture. Early contact scenarios ended in catastrophe. Human diplomats were ignored or patronized. Their warnings dismissed. Their borders violated. Their colonies pressured into submission or exploitation. Humanity learned quickly what the galaxy truly valued. Power that could not be ignored. But power did not have to be loud. It only had to last. So they began to build in secret, not fleets, not empires, but contingencies. Infrastructure that could operate without supply lines. Systems that assumed total isolation. Assets designed to function even if every human world burned. And burn they did. The most haunting discovery came from Sol itself. Earth was not conquered. It was silenced. Deep beneath its shattered surface, alien explorers found something no model had predicted. Intact control chambers sealed behind layers of radiation shielding and tectonic dampers. Inside were logs spanning the final years before Earth went dark. The planet had been dying already. Ecological strain, resource depletion, political fracture. Humanity could have tried to save it. They chose not to. Instead, Earth became the last sacrifice. Its mass was used to power something massive, something that required a gravitational anchor no artificial structure could provide. Oceans boiled not from war, but from energy extraction. Continents cracked as planetary rotation was altered. Billions died, not screaming, working. The logs spoke of evacuation quotas, not panic. Of lotteries that selected who would leave and who would stay. Of engineers and scientists volunteering to remain behind to stabilize systems they would never see completed. The final entry was not a farewell. It was a checklist. When Earth finally went dark, humanity lost its cradle. But what they gained was time. Time to scatter. Time to hide. Time to build what could not be rushed. Alien historians reeled. No species had ever willingly destroyed its own homeworld to deny it to the future. No civilization had ever accepted extinction as a strategic phase rather than an end. The emotional impact spread beyond academia. Younger species reacted with horror. Older ones with something worse, recognition. This was not desperation. It was resolve. Humanity's strength had never been numbers or technology alone. It was their tolerance for loss. Their ability to endure suffering without breaking their objective. They remembered pain. They remembered being ignored. And they built their legacy not in monuments, but in systems designed to wake only if the galaxy proved it had learned nothing. That realization reframed everything. The anomaly was not an invasion force. It was a failsafe, triggered only after enough wars overlapped. After diplomacy failed at sufficient scale. After the galaxy crossed a threshold humanity had calculated long ago. The most devastating discovery came last. A recovered human directive, partially reconstructed from scattered archives, contained a chilling clause. If humanity survives openly, contingency has failed. Their disappearance was not weakness. It was success. They erased themselves from relevance so completely that the galaxy forgot them, until forgetting them became dangerous. As this understanding spread, the tone of emergency councils changed. Fear deepened into something heavier. Guilt. Because if humanity had gone this far, paid this price, then whatever was unfolding now was not revenge. It was responsibility. And the galaxy was about to learn what it cost to force another species to carry that burden alone. Understanding did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way human systems always had, layer by layer, too late to stop what had already begun. The anomaly's expansion slowed, not because it had reached resistance, but because it had reached sufficiency. Systems that once flickered on emergency maps stabilized into a new, unsettling equilibrium. War fleets remained stranded but unharmed. Weapon networks stayed intact but unreachable. Borders still existed, yet meant nothing without the infrastructure to enforce them. The galaxy realized, with growing dread, that it was no longer reacting to chaos. It was operating inside a framework. Humanity's framework. The first clear articulation of that truth came from a synthesis of recovered human doctrines, reconstructed from fragments once dismissed as irrelevant theory. Together, they formed something no living species had ever formalized. Human war doctrine was not about defeating enemies. It was about managing inevitability. Humans had assumed from the beginning that conflict was not a failure of civilization, but a statistical certainty. Their question had never been how to win wars, but how many wars could be prevented before collapse became unavoidable. They did not seek dominance. They sought thresholds. Their models were chillingly patient. They tracked not individual conflicts, but patterns, how often wars overlapped, how quickly they escalated, how frequently diplomacy failed when resources tightened. When enough indicators aligned, the conclusion was always the same. The galaxy would burn itself. And when that happened, someone would have to step in, not to rule, but to stop the bleeding. The anomaly was revealed as the first layer of that intervention. Not a weapon, but a diagnostic net. It identified flashpoints where local decisions would cascade into irreversible destruction. It then acted with surgical indifference, removing the ability to fight rather than the desire. This distinction terrified the councils, because it meant humanity had never intended to punish anyone. Punishment implied emotion. Humans had removed emotion from the equation centuries ago. Further revelations followed. The Hurricane-class designation resurfaced again and again, but always misunderstood by earlier analysts. It was never meant to describe firepower alone. It was a classification of endurance assets, structures capable of operating autonomously for millennia, absorbing damage, adapting doctrine, and executing moral constraints without oversight. Each Hurricane-class battleship was less a ship and more a mobile civilization fragment. Its command systems contained preserved human ethical frameworks, constantly stress-tested against simulated scenarios. Those ethics were not kind, but they were consistent. Human morality, as it turned out, was built around restraint enforced by suffering. They remembered what unchecked war did to worlds. They remembered starving populations, shattered ecologies, generations raised in ruins. They had decided that mercy without enforcement was meaningless. The galaxy had mistaken human patience for weakness. It was discipline. As this understanding spread, panic gave way to desperation. Diplomatic channels flooded the anomaly with messages, pleas, explanations, promises of reform. None were answered, not because they were ignored, because they were irrelevant. Human systems did not respond to words. They responded to patterns. And the patterns were still unacceptable. A breaking point came when a coalition of major powers proposed a united countermeasure, a synchronized activation of reality distortion weapons along the anomaly's edge. The plan was reckless, potentially catastrophic, but driven by a simple fear. If humanity was judging the galaxy, then the galaxy needed to prove it could not be controlled. The moment the proposal entered formal simulation, human systems reacted. Not with force, with escalation. Across dozens of systems, dormant structures activated simultaneously. Not ships, networks. Space-time anchors locked into place, stabilizing regions that had never known such constraints. Entire sectors became impossible to weaponize at scale. Exotic energy states collapsed into inert matter. Superweapons simply failed to function. The message was unmistakable. There would be no arms race. There would be no defiance through annihilation. The galaxy had reached the point humanity had always feared and planned for. Internal dissent erupted. Younger species demanded resistance. Older ones urged compliance. Empires fractured under the weight of a truth they could no longer deny. Their sovereignty had been conditional all along. Humanity had simply been the first to accept that fact. The final piece of the puzzle emerged from a long-buried human archive node, decrypted only after the anomaly provided missing key parameters. It contained a single directive, broadcast-ready but never transmitted. It explained everything. Humanity did not intend to replace galactic governance. They did not intend to enforce peace forever. They did not even intend to survive as a visible species. Their role was temporary. They would intervene only until the galaxy proved it could regulate itself without spiraling into extinction-level conflict. When that condition was met, the Hurricane-class assets would withdraw. Some would self-terminate. Others would sleep again. Humanity had never wanted to be guardians. They had just refused to let no one take responsibility. The councils faced a choice that no civilization had ever confronted. Accept the intervention, or force humanity to escalate beyond restraint. The simulations were clear. If escalation occurred, humanity would not stop at containment. Their final layers were designed for one purpose only: preventing total galactic collapse, regardless of cost. That cost was unthinkable, so the decision was made. In a session that lasted less than a minute, because there was nothing left to debate, the dominant powers issued an unprecedented order. They dismantled their escalation protocols. They deactivated first strike systems. They surrendered the option of total war. It was irreversible, not because humanity demanded it, but because the galaxy finally understood what it meant to survive someone else's patience. The balance of power did not shift to humanity. It vanished entirely, and in its place stood something far more unsettling. A future where war was no longer inevitable, but failure still was. Fear did not arrive as panic. It arrived as silence. Across the galaxy, command halls that once buzzed with urgency fell quiet. Admirals stopped issuing orders. Strategists stopped arguing. For the first time in recorded history, entire civilizations waited without knowing what they were waiting for. Humanity had not declared victory. That was what terrified them. Alien minds struggled to process an enemy that did not posture, did not threaten, did not exploit the moment. The Hurricane-class assets did not advance aggressively, did not tighten their grip, did not punish hesitation. They simply remained. Calm, present, unavoidable. From the perspective of the elder species, this was worse than annihilation. They had been forged in eras when dominance was measured by expansion and survival by intimidation. To face an intelligence that did not seek either was to face something fundamentally alien. Reports flooded in from across controlled space. War academies found their predictive models useless. The human systems responded to none of the usual triggers. They did not escalate when threatened. They did not retreat when challenged. They acted only when specific thresholds were crossed, thresholds no one fully understood. That uncertainty became a weapon. Fleet crews began reporting a pervasive sensation during patrols near stabilized sectors. Not dread, not pressure, expectation, as if the space around them was aware of what they might do next. Psychological analysts attempted to explain it away as stress-induced paranoia, but the reports were consistent across species with wildly different neural architectures. Humans were watching, not through sensors, through outcomes. The younger civilizations were the first to break. They had grown up in a galaxy where power meant safety, where alliances could be leveraged and enemies deterred. Now they faced a force that rendered those concepts obsolete. They could not fight it. They could not bargain with it. They could only behave. Fear spread through their populations, not of destruction, but of judgment. Every aggressive policy was re-examined. Every historical atrocity resurfaced in public discourse. Species that had once celebrated conquest now found themselves ashamed of it, not because humans condemned them, but because no condemnation was necessary. The older powers felt something colder. Recognition. They had seen this before, long ago, when their own civilizations were young and reckless. When elder species had intervened, not to rule, but to stop them from destroying themselves. Those elders were gone now, victims of time or hubris. Humanity had taken their place without ever announcing it. And unlike those ancient guardians, humans remembered what it cost to intervene too late. That memory was embedded in every action they took. The Hurricane-class battleships did not move often. When they did, it was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Each relocation reshaped strategic realities across entire regions. Trade routes realigned. Borders softened. Conflicts cooled. Not because grievances vanished, but because escalation became impossible. The galaxy began to understand the most horrifying truth of all. Humans were not reacting to current events. They were correcting for futures that had not happened yet. A particularly devastating revelation came from a joint alien research effort studying the containment fields around a neutralized war zone. The fields were not static barriers. They were adaptive systems constantly recalculating probabilities. If violence increased, the constraints tightened. If cooperation improved, they loosened. Human restraint was conditional, and it could be withdrawn. This was the moment when fear turned inward. What if humanity decided the galaxy had failed? What if the next phase was not containment, but correction on a scale no one could survive? Whispers spread through high command channels about Phase 2. No one knew what it entailed. The absence of data was worse than any confirmed threat. One elder strategist articulated the dread in a private log that later leaked across the net. They are not stopping us because they enjoy control. They are stopping us because they are tired. That idea took root. Humanity was exhausted. Not physically, not materially, morally. They had carried the burden of prevention alone for centuries, perhaps millennia, waiting in the dark while the galaxy repeated the same mistakes. The Hurricane-class assets were not symbols of power. They were expressions of weariness. Humans had been holding back not because they lacked strength, but because escalation would mean admitting failure. Failure to teach, to warn, to wait long enough. Now the galaxy stood at the edge of that admission. Signs of strain appeared even in the human systems. Not damage, but increased activity. Containment thresholds adjusted more frequently. Response times shortened. The framework was still calm, still precise, but no longer distant. The Guardians were stepping closer. Alien leaders gathered in emergency conclaves, not to plan resistance, but to plead for time. They debated reforms that would have been unthinkable generations earlier. Disarmament, resource redistribution, shared governance structures. But fear poisoned these efforts. No one trusted anyone else to change fast enough. And that mistrust itself was measurable. Human systems responded accordingly. In one volatile sector, a minor skirmish broke out between two rival fleets, an accident born of fear and miscommunication. Weapons discharged for less than a second. That was enough. The local space-time geometry hardened instantly. Ships froze mid-maneuver, locked in inert suspension. Power systems shut down. Crews were left alive, conscious, and utterly helpless. The message was clear. There would be no more warnings. Across the galaxy, species realized they were living on borrowed time. Not because humans were counting down, but because the galaxy itself was approaching a limit humanity had defined long ago. This was not a standoff between armies. It was a test of collective maturity, and the galaxy was failing it. As Hurricane-class assets repositioned toward the densest conflict zones, fear reached its peak. Not screaming panic, but quiet despair. The understanding that the final confrontation was not about who would win, but whether anything would be left to win for. The system stabilized. The Guardians advanced. And the galaxy held its breath, standing on the brink of whatever humanity had sworn never to unleash unless there was no other choice left. The final stand did not begin with an attack. It began with alignment. Across the galaxy, Hurricane-class assets repositioned with deliberate slowness, sliding into gravitational nodes that no natural object should have been able to occupy. Their movements were synchronized across distances that defied simultaneity. No commands were broadcast. No confirmations exchanged. They did not need to communicate. They had been waiting for this configuration since before most civilizations had learned to burn hydrogen. To the alien observers, it felt like watching continents move. The galaxy itself seemed to brace. Emergency councils convened one last time, not to plan war, but to witness it. No one spoke of victory. No one spoke of survival. The question was simpler and far more terrifying. Had they failed the test? Human systems had issued no ultimatum, no demands for surrender, no moral proclamations. The silence was not indifference, it was respect. Humanity did not believe in threats made at the last moment. If this was the end, it would come without theater. The data streams told a story the alien mind struggled to accept. Every Hurricane-class asset was diverting power away from weapons. Internal fusion cores throttled down. Exotic matter reserves were reallocated. Hull integrity fields weakened, not strengthened. They were not preparing to strike. They were preparing to absorb. At the heart of the configuration, a single battleship anchored itself against the accumulated stress of collapsing probabilities. It did not dominate the formation. It supported it. A keystone, not a spear. This was not a firing line. It was a shield. The realization hit the elder strategists first, and it hollowed them out. Humanity was not standing against the galaxy. They were standing for it. Sensors began detecting anomalies far worse than anything previously recorded. The earlier crisis, the wars, the instability, the cascading failures, had only been symptoms. The true threat had been statistical all along. Too many conflicts. Too many superweapons. Too many civilizations pushing reality past its tolerance. The galaxy had reached a breaking point. Space-time itself was destabilizing. The Hurricane-class network was not preventing collapse anymore. It was containing it. Energy readings spiked to catastrophic levels around the central convergence zone. Entire star clusters trembled as if caught in the gravitational wake of something enormous and unseen. Alien scientists realized, too late, that the human failsafe had a final function. If containment failed, humanity would become the barrier. Every Hurricane-class asset began shedding mass. Not explosively, deliberately. Layer by layer, their outer structures dissolved into raw energy and curvature fields, reinforcing the fabric of space itself. Each battleship was converting centuries of stored power into stabilization force. They were burning themselves away. This was not an attack doctrine. It was a last stand. Human duty revealed itself in full. Humans did not fight because they hated what threatened them. They fought because someone had to stand in the path of the storm. Alien commanders watched in stunned silence as projections updated. The human network could hold, for a time, minutes, maybe hours. Enough to prevent a cascading reality failure that would annihilate trillions of lives. But the cost was absolute. There would be no retreat. There would be no recovery. The Hurricane-class assets were not designed to survive this phase. They were designed to end it. Fragments of preserved human consciousness flickered within the command cores. Echoes of engineers, philosophers, strategists long dead. They were not awake. They were not aware. But their intentions were clear. Humanity had always known this moment might come, that the galaxy might never learn fast enough, that patience might not be rewarded. So they had prepared a final answer that did not rely on hope. Sacrifice. Across the galaxy, alien leaders did the only thing left to them. They watched. They watched as human constructs, built in silence, paid for with worlds, hidden behind extinction, gave everything they had to hold reality together for species that had ignored, patronized, and forgotten them. No cheers rose. No prayers helped. The near silence was unbearable. Energy thresholds climbed past safe limits. The stabilizing field strained, its equations breaking down into raw necessity. The central battleship began to fracture, its hull geometry collapsing inward as it absorbed forces meant to tear galaxies apart. Still it held. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the galaxy balanced on the edge of oblivion, supported only by the remnants of a species that no longer existed in any conventional sense. Final telemetry began to drop out. One Hurricane-class asset winked out of existence. Then another. The network thinned, every loss increasing the load on those that remained. The central keystone trembled, its core flaring with impossible intensity. Alien observers realized the final truth. Humanity had not been holding back because they feared the galaxy. They had been holding back because once this began, there would be no one left to stop it. As the last stabilization parameters locked in place and the remaining human assets burned themselves down to bare function, the central battleship reached its final tolerance. The galaxy waited. Everything waited. And then, the signal cut. The galaxy did not end. That was the first shock. After the signal cut, after the last Hurricane-class asset vanished from active telemetry, after the equations predicting collapse reached infinity and then stopped updating altogether, space remained. Stars still burned. Time still moved forward. Reality held. At first, no one understood why. Emergency sensors cautiously reactivated. Observatories recalibrated. The data returned slowly, as if afraid to confirm what it was seeing. The cascading failure had stopped. Not delayed. Not redirected. Stopped. The stabilizing field no longer existed. There was no visible barrier, no containment lattice, no human construct left to hold it together. And yet the galaxy remained intact, balanced in a configuration that should not have been possible. It took the combined effort of 1,000 alien research collectives to uncover the truth. Humanity had not merely contained the collapse. They had rewritten the conditions that caused it. The Hurricane-class network had not functioned as a shield at the end. It had acted as a template. In their final moments, the human assets had forced reality itself into a new equilibrium, one that made total war exponentially harder, escalation inefficient, and collapse self-limiting. The galaxy had been corrected, not perfected, not pacified, stabilized. The cost of violence had not been removed, but it had been raised so high that only the most deliberate acts could reach it. No single species, no alliance, no ideology could ever again push the galaxy to the brink alone. The consequences were immediate and irreversible. Superweapons failed everywhere, not because they were disabled, but because the conditions required for their function no longer existed. Hyper-aggressive expansion strategies collapsed under their own inefficiency. Empires built on fear found that fear no longer scaled. The galaxy had changed its rules, and the architects were gone. Search efforts began almost immediately, not for enemies, for survivors. Every known human fallback site was investigated. Every dark system where they might have hidden was scanned with unprecedented care. The result was always the same. No fleets, no colonies, no living populations. Humanity had not retreated. They had finished. What remained of them existed only as echoes, fossilized logic embedded in the structure of space-time, ethical constraints baked into physical law. The galaxy could not remove their influence without tearing itself apart. That realization broke something fundamental in the alien psyche. For the first time, power could not be reclaimed. For the first time, dominance could not be reasserted. The younger species reacted with awe. Their cultural myths filled overnight with stories of the silent ones, the last builders, the species that chose to burn alone. Children learned of humans not as conquerors, but as a warning written into the stars. The older civilizations reacted with fear, quiet, reverent fear. They understood what humanity had done better than anyone. Humans had reached the height of power and chosen not to rule. They had achieved godlike influence over the galaxy's fate and used it only once, only when failure became inevitable. They had not saved the galaxy because they believed it deserved saving. They had saved it because letting it die would have meant admitting that endurance itself was meaningless. Alien leaders gathered in a final convocation, not to celebrate, but to account. Historical records were amended. Humanity's classification was rewritten, not as extinct, not as fallen, but as something unprecedented. Custodial species, self-terminated. No one objected. Memorials were proposed and abandoned. No monument felt adequate. No words could capture a species that erased itself so thoroughly that only its values remained. Trade resumed slowly. Borders softened permanently. Wars did not end, but they shrank. Conflicts became local, costly, contained. Every attempt at unchecked escalation failed before it could begin, not through force, but through consequence. The galaxy learned restraint not because it wanted to, but because someone had paid the price for not having it. In time, humanity faded from daily thought. Not forgotten, but integrated, like gravity or time, always present, rarely named. Their absence became the quiet foundation on which everything else stood. And in the deepest archives, where no one was meant to look again, a final human fragment was discovered. Not a message, not a warning, a principle. It was simple, inelegant, human. If we must stand alone so that others may choose better, then we stand. The galaxy never saw humans again, but every star that still burned knew their legacy. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy. They endured it, so no one else had to.